Live with our 86th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Number 86. We're just rolling right along. We got a lot to talk about this week. We're joined by Rohan. We'll do introductions shortly for him. But this week I've been in San Francisco, did the code review workshop on Saturday morning at B-Sides SF. I'm trying to avoid RSA because now all the suits showed up, and yeah, that's about how I feel about that. The workshop was interesting. We tried to do like a 3-hour condensed version of secure code review. I was happy with the results and the interaction and people being there. It's just a lot of data to actually cover and try and get through. So I didn't feel like the results that we pulled out of it were as refined as what we get in the 2-day course, Ken. It was still useful. And I think people still took stuff away from it, but definitely having more time to do code review is always a good thing. It just taught me that again, right? So
There's no way we can give that full course in that short a period of time and for it to be like everything that come through. It's like you get the basic, maybe the basic overview of like the table. You get like, it's like reading the table of contents of a book to me, and then not actually reading any of the chapters. That's the best way I could explain that.
Yeah, it was just, it was like, oh yeah, and here's all these checklists, go, right?
They're like,
you gotta look at authentication, authorization, auditing. Like I was like, oh crap, yeah. All right, we'll pick one of those and then let's do that, right? It was just, but it was fun. It was still good. Like B-Sides SF is a pretty cool conference, all things considered. They have it at a movie theater, right? I don't know if you knew that. So
no. Is that the one that has like, does it have like a video games as well? Attached to the movie theater?
Yeah.
Like I mean a lot, not like just like a little area, like a lot, like a 2-story multi-level.
Well, I'm not sure. I didn't see a 2-level thing there. So it's the Metreon. It's right next to Moscone.
It's the one I'm thinking of. I probably just don't remember the layout correctly.
Yeah. But it's so Kelly Robinson, who we had on a couple weeks ago, was on the she was one of the speakers, was talking about 2FA and Authy, and like she's in the IMAX theater presenting, and so the slides are massive. Like the emojis are bigger than people. You know what I mean? It was just like
awesome.
Holy crap! But it was cool. But it's super comfy, right? You're sitting in movie theater seats for talks, and it was good.
Yeah. That's nice. Get a nice. The problem with that is like after a lunch, I would fall asleep or start to fall asleep. I would have the hardest time, like eating lunch and then sitting in a comfy chair in a movie theater setting. Man, that's dangerous.
That's dangerous
for me.
Well, at least you'd get a nap in or whatever, right? At times.
Yeah.
There was
sounds like you're having a good time.
Yeah. There was some good talks that came out. Clint did a panel again on DevOps or DevSecOps with Asta and, kind of that normal crew that they talked about war stories of trying to implement security at different organizations. That was good. That mental health hackers that I was tweeting out about was really interesting as well. They had a couple people that were into the industry, but they actually had a doctor who specializes in psychology and psychiatry, right? That was there talking about mental health. And so, I posted some resources on Twitter.
Man, that slide you sent me,
that
hit home too hard. It was like, it was like, it said burnout, emotional depletion, detachment and cynicism, low personal achievement, depersonalization. And it shows like Baby Yoda as the first year in InfoSec and old Yoda is the 3 years in InfoSec, and I'm like, man, home.
It's hard not to be cynical, right? Like, I know that I ride that line a lot of times. So, yeah.
Well, anyway. You know me, man. The last time I had a burnout, I spent 2.5 months doing nothing, just going for long walks and watching Game of Thrones. So,
hey, self-care is important, right? Self-care is important. So,
yeah, man. But yeah.
So there was a lot of good resources that came out of it. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of RSA. I mean, obviously, everybody's like, the big discussion point now is the whole COVID-19 fact that all the companies backed out because of the coronavirus, but there's still a ton of people down here, right? So
yeah,
we'll see. Yeah. I mean, life doesn't stop, right? So,
I'm skeptical of the coronavirus because I feel like, yes, people have died, but the numbers aren't quite what like the flu is at times. So I'm not as afraid of the coronavirus as maybe I should be. I don't know. But
yeah.
Anyways.
Well, that's what I heard, right? Like talking to my kid's physician, as they were saying, it's a coronavirus, but influenza, kills a lot of people too. And we don't talk about it because we're used to it. Right. So,
yeah.
But
not to say it shouldn't be like quarantined and taken seriously, but I don't know. Just less. I'm not super concerned about it. I've been flying and I've seen people with masks on while I'm flying, and I'm like, all right, if that makes you feel more comfortable, I'm not gonna whatever, but that's your thing. But yeah, I feel fine without a mask flying, so I'll be all right. Anyways.
So we've gone to mental health and the coronavirus. So this is another episode of Absolute AppSec. So,
absolute rambling.
Yeah, absolute rambling by Seth and Ken. Let's go ahead and introduce Rohan. We'll dive into,
and then we should get into that news story.
Oh yes, we should. But yeah, let's introduce Rohan first, and then we can talk about the critical PayPal vulnerabilities. So,
right. So Rohan Joshi, hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Awesome. He's a manager of AppSec at Paylocity. Hopefully I'm also getting that right. What's interesting about your background is it looks like you've gone from essentially you've done it all on you went from the offensive side, it looks like to me anyways, just following your career progression. It looks like you did a lot of, I mean, there it does appear like you did some sort of testing internally. Maybe that's blue team, but a lot of it looks like you have a background in hacking, and I thought that was super interesting. So that's definitely something we're going to want to talk about, the difference between going from offense to sort of a defense minded perspective. I tried to post your Twitter link, by the way, and your Twitter account seems to be you don't use it at all.
Yep. I'm not too active on social media.
Yeah, and I mean, what's going to be fun to talk about is I'm sure Paylocity is definitely, obviously a high visibility target, and so keeping that environment secure, I'm sure has a whole host of challenges. So I'm definitely excited to dig in, and we've got this news story I had posted to you all to sort of look at. So. Yeah, I figured we could just start there, dig in, and then go into sort of your background after the news story, and then just talk about your day to day.
Cool. That sounds good. So the way I started off in InfoSec was a pure accident. And based on my accent, you guys might have already figured out that I was born and raised back in India. So my early access to technology was around 2003 and 4. We got our first personal computer with 128 megs of RAM, 40 gigs of hard disk space. Fun times. And back in the day, not sure if you guys already know about this, but there was a social media platform called Orkut. And it was big in the Latin American side and also the Southeast Asian side. And this was in competition with MySpace. And I got my account hacked.
Your account got hacked.
Yeah, my account got hacked, and I was very brand new to everything PC. So I started Googling stuff, trying to understand where did I click, what did I do, go back to my history, and eventually I figured out what the URL was, the phishing URL, like where it was hosted, who was it registered against, and this person was really very naive to put their real name and phone number there. So I gave them a
So
call.
wait,
So the
they-
hacker
Yeah, I then thought
left
like,
his name and phone number on
yeah,
the phishing page. Nice.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
and I was like, okay, this is very weird and naive at the same time. So I get in touch with this person, and they're like, "Oh, you found us. Good. Do you want to come work with us?" And I was like, "Nope." So essentially, what they were trying to do is, it was a group of people who were trying to recruit people who had the skill set to track them down. And obviously, we don't want to end up in the dark side of things. uh,
Yeah.
but I think that is where I started thinking about, like, going from phishing to writing like keyloggers, how do keyloggers work and stuff like that. And my basic interest was largely around recon.
Mhm.
And when Google Maps, it really took off around that time. We had this whole keyhole markup language where you could look for flight status in real time. There's lots of information out there. Probably wouldn't want to get into the details, but uh, and that naturally led me into software development. And if I am a developer by heart today, and a security an AppSec person by profession, but my heart is with the software development piece. So I started doing a lot of front end development. Learned like a little bit of VB, and then got like deep into .NET. And then I I got my bachelor's in computer science, and then came over to the US, got my master's in infosec. I graduated from DePaul University here in Chicago. And after I graduated, I started working for Paylocity as a QA security engineer. I mean, the title is like somewhat weird, QA security engineer, but I was embedded in our QA automation team. And then from there on, I started learning Python, and basically performing pen test against, like, using OS Top 10, the ASVS, and try to automate everything in the ASVS back in the day. Uh, got exposed to stuff like Beautiful Soup, web scraping, and eventually the company started growing like crazy. And when I make a fair comparison on our growth rate from when I started and where we are today, uh, the amount of money we made every year, we make 4 times of the same amount every quarter today.
Oh wow.
Whoa.
Yep. So we experienced like exponential growth, and we went public. So naturally, we had the need of having an dedicated infosec team. So as the first person in the infosec team, I did a little bit of forensics, a little bit of SecOps, incident response, wrote up a couple of policies, and then eventually settled down in the AppSec space.
What a trajectory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely half-assed a lot of things because it was just a need of the hour, and I just had to do it. So.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty standard, right? Well, not necessarily, half-assing, but like, just trying to stay ahead of what needs to be done. I'm interested in the whole QA security engineer title and position. What was that like were you the first person in QA that had that position, or was there a team that did that? I mean, it's not super common, right? Like I talk a lot about like unit tests and how we need security unit tests. It feels like that's what you were doing at Paylocity. So like,
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think in 2014 we went public, and that is exactly when we, went from being waterfall to agile.
Okay.
And when I joined Velocity, we were like hardcore waterfall shop, and uh, we had a dedicated QA automation team, like 4 or 5 people, and I was the fifth hire, and I was asked to secure the applications, right? So
Okay.
basically writing test cases and abuse cases and stuff. And that probably was my first exposure to Burp Suite.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that, okay, this is good. This is a good start to test something out. But if I had to test something at scale, I probably need to go back and do some kind of headless browsing. And that's where I started working with like the Selenium framework, and then eventually went on to do a little bit of Cucumber and Python.
Who was driving the requirement for because I'm curious, like who it within the company was like forward thinking enough to say we should have a security specific QA person on the team, because that's not That, I mean, we talk about it as like, yeah, we're basically glorified QA, and we've talked about before like utilizing QA to do some security testing, but it's rare that you actually ever see anybody do that inside of an organization. So I'm curious where that requirement was being driven from.
Yeah, and I think that this was prior to me joining Paylocity. I think it was a result of a pen test where we realized, okay, like we are finding bugs and we need someone dedicated to do this. So the mindset back in the day was anyone who's external is a pen tester. Anyone who we hire full time is going to be the QA person who's going to work closely with the dev teams. And then you wanted a QA who is focused on security, and that's how like I ended up getting the job.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, right? Like, I mean, it actually speaks to how seriously they take security, if like, especially if they were doing that 2014, 2015, because that, I mean, the whole sputter stuff that I did, Ken, and it was, right about that same time frame as far as why don't we see more security in QA, right? That's realistically was the question that we were trying to answer. So, definitely you were ahead of the curve there. So
yeah, it seems a little bit ahead of the times.
Yeah, and I think being the first QA person who did security, it definitely poses a lot of challenges, because now you're bringing in terminologies like authorization checks, authentication checks, cross-site scripting, OWASP top 10, dynamic scanning, static scanning, and you can go on and on with your apps with our AppSec jargons. But it was difficult upfront, but like given how they take security like very, very, very seriously, and this is something that I share that with everyone, is that the best part and the worst part of my job is the same thing, that I have like full support from the company and the leadership. Like we absolutely have zero tolerance for risk, and we need to do everything required to secure our applications and our customer data. And I mean, it's awesome. Like always don't get that support, but at the same time, the pressure is on me. Now I have everything I asked for, so I cannot mess it up.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like one of those things where when you're like, well, you can make excuses like, oh, well, I'm understaffed, or I don't have the budget that I need. You can kind of like, but when someone's like, oh yeah, no, like we are going to give you everything you need to like do it perfectly, then it's like, oh crap, I got to do it right. It's more pressure in a way. Because you can't blame anything away. You've got what you need,
Yeah. So. And I think the one reason, like just like you said, Ken, that we got a head start and we were like somewhat ahead of our times when it comes to like application security. It gave us a chance to experiment a lot with what we wanted to do. And like I also mentioned about our growth rate, like everything is changing at light speed every single day. Our frameworks are changing. Our devs are changing. The code is constantly changing. We are deploying like at least 50 times faster than what we used to do before. And when you look at all the AppSec processes, like you cannot just rely on the pen test all the time. So you have to shift left, as I say in the industry, and need to have that DevSecOps mindset, and need to have that buy-in from the leadership to make sure that we are okay with this and this is the way we want to go.
Yeah. So what are like some components of an AppSec program besides pen testing? Like, what are some of the various things that you think need to be done activity wise?
Yeah. So like 2 years ago, that's when I really started to scale my team. And my team is basically broken down to like two functions. One is the offensive security side, primarily focused on pen testing web applications. And the second part of it is the security engineering side, where we automate static scanning, dynamic scanning, and we are now working on a cool project to automate business logic testing. So no more authorization check problems. And I think once we started looking at this, one of the biggest gaps that we realized was that we don't speak the same language as our product teams do. So there was a people and a training component that we had to solve first. So we started rolling out, like we built custom in-house training for our QAs and devs specific to Paylocity. Like we tried commercial off-the-shelf training and that went like totally sideways, got like lots of critical feedback. I was like, okay, no more purchasing it from the vendor. And we literally, whenever we find findings on a pen test, we record them and funnel that back into our training program. So that's how when we have a new dev or a QA join Paylocity, like they are aware of what we found previously and what not to do.
Yeah, I don't mean to like. Well, I do. I don't care. Whatever. I don't mean to like. Well, it's not, I don't mean this in a rude way, but yeah, those companies hawking CBTs that are SCORM compliant still. Like, I don't think they understand. Like, if you've got, especially when you've got, I mean, regardless, developers are developers, right? So you've got like people that are competent at writing code, and then you throw this crap at them, and it's like, that was your one shot to like have, or at least your initial shot to have like a positive sort of interaction with a bunch of devs all at once. And if you don't get it right, which I feel like if you're doing like those cheap basic CBTs, you're not gonna get it right. Like I mean, they're like, oh, here's the OWASP top 10 in a way that's like, what? I mean, it's not usually relevant. It's short. It's like, or even worse, it's lengthy and repetitive. Like, it's just your one shot. You've got, like, you can't screw that up. And I don't think that those vendors hawking that product have any appreciation for what it's like internally on a team when you distribute that out to people and they hate it. You burned a bridge, kind of.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that keeps me and my team, up at night, is that we don't want to be doing anything where we lose credibility from our product teams, because it's really, really hard to earn their respect. And, it only takes like one mistake to burn the bridges.
For sure. Yeah, that's something people don't really talk about much. Maybe more so now, but like, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just like you have to get that interaction. It's because you can have the like, beating with a stick sort of mentality, but that's not going to get you anywhere. So,
well, and that was one thing that actually came up. I can't remember one of the talks. I think it was the panel with Clint this week. Is somebody mentioned the fact that, I think it was Doug, but that of all the people that you're dealing with, of all the developers, you can bet that every single one has had a negative experience in their past with security. Right. So it's not just your relationship, like as a security person with them, that you are dealing with. It's all that past baggage of the security guy at some organization that they used to be at that was just, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and so, yeah. So actually putting something out there that keeps your credibility or maintains it is way more important than, hey, we just need to push this compliance check through. So I know you're going to hate it, but all it does is kind of reinforce that stereotype, right?
Yeah, and I think I believe it's like on professionals like us to go above and beyond and help the devs who have that mindset to change their mindset and look at AppSec from a different point of view. And this is something that we very seriously practice at Paylocity, and especially within our InfoSec team as a whole, is that empathy begins with us. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that we are practicing empathy every single day, because at the end of the day, the developers, although it's been the agile mindset, they still have a lot of things on their plate, from like regular QA stuff, new features, bugs, performance stuff, security stuff, and they have very little wiggle room to do everything AppSec. So the focus is around like, how do we empathize, with what they have, and how do we create like some kind of automation where, we are able to be a tailwind for them rather than being headwinds, and making sure that whatever we have like Dash and Sash is all automated and move towards that DevSecOps mindset.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a really good point, right? Is that their capacity to actually do something security related is pretty limited with all the other pressures that are going on. I don't know. It's like, if you want to learn empathy for developers, go actually try and fix a security bug, right? Like, and what you're trying to do and how much time it takes, and then how much testing be on top of that, right? Like, yep. Oh, okay, like the whole back and forth that I know as security people, you're like, oh, come on, it's just insecure direct object reference. You should be able to do this in like one line of code. And you're like, no, this code base is 20 years old.
Yeah.
They're doing authorization checks in multiple places, and the session isn't quite set up like that. You know what I mean? Like, there's always so like, there's got to be some empathy there.
Yeah.
I struggle going the opposite direction now. So for me, like, I don't know if either of you experienced this, but for me, I actually struggle with, like, a lot of times now I've gone the complete opposite way where I'm like, it's probably not that big of a deal. I don't know. Is it worth fixing? It's honestly, like, because like when you've seen enough things, like what risks can exist and what things do pop up and what like a real, like something feels like, oh, that's not super secure. But then like you start factoring, well, but this doesn't impact that. And like, this is for not even for external users. And then, this doesn't allow first to even get there. You're behind this wall and you're like, you start to get to that point where you're like, I don't know. It doesn't seem, I don't fix it when you feel like, I mean, I struggle with that sometimes. I'm like, get whenever you feel like that makes sense to fix sometimes, but then I have to be like, oh, I'm a security person. Like, I have to keep some line there. But yeah, I don't know. For me, I've struggled and gone the other way after doing this for so long.
Yeah.
That is me when I look at the results from static scans.
It only took us a half hour to get into bagging up static scans. That's it. That's awesome.
I think one thing we did to gamify the whole program was we came up with this whole concept of ninjas and champions. And what we do is like we have every product team volunteer a dev to be a security champion and a QA person to be a security ninja. And beyond the regular AppSec training, they actually go out and take the Pluralsight's Burpseed training for like 300 minutes or so. So I think it's like walks you through like what is Burp Suite, how to use Burp Suite, how to use the different modules and stuff like that. And once they complete that, we created a deliberately vulnerable application. It's a ripoff of Damn Vulnerable Web App, but we kind of retained the payroll theme to make sense for our business. And they pen test that particular application. After they pen test the application, they turn in the results to the AppSec team, and then we certify them as ninjas and champions. And I think that whole gamification really worked in our favor. And we have like close to 500 members in our engineering team. And our security satellite community today is like around like 100 people or so. And out of the 100 people,
awesome.
we have 60 people who are certified as champions and ninjas, meaning they can actually pen test.
Does that part of their count like as part of their performance review or part of their job function? Because I've been thinking more and more about this, about like when I ask for people to be like security minded in their teams, because we're constantly like trying to improve things. And I was thinking like, as a direct result of this podcast and some of the conversations we've had, I mean, it kind of feels like it does make sense to maybe be part of their date. If it's going to be part of something that they're doing for their job, it should be part of like some sort of +1 or something on the performance review or something, I don't know if you guys do that. I don't know how that works.
Yeah. So like in at our company, like it is assumed that we build secure applications. So there wasn't a need to explicitly call that out. I honestly don't know like how that works from a performance standpoint, but it's assumed that, like when if you're a QA, security is a subset of it, means that you need to make sure that you are testing for like security bugs. But the problem that we found was like people wanted to do this kind of work, but they did not know how.
Yeah.
And that is exactly where we thought, okay, we don't want to be looking at like CBD nuggets and stuff. Like, how can we create like custom training and gamify this whole thing to get the engagement going? And this is like a purely on voluntary basis, no enforcements here. So having 60 pen testers is definitely helping us out. Couldn't ask for anything better, right?
Yeah, just having 60 people in a 500-person organization that know security issues, right, and can speak intelligibly to them, like that's a huge bonus. I mean, most organizations, like still to this day that we walk into, like the guys have never, they have a hard time spelling XSS. You know what I mean? Like it's just, X what now? X. Oh yeah. So again, it feels like you like the org that you're at is definitely on the forefront of that. I don't know. What was that? I was talking to Justin Collins recently, and one of the things that he talked about was going back to kind of the empathy. like he brought up that whenever somebody in his org comes to him and makes that like, oh, you're the security team, you're going to keep us safe from the bad guys, right? Like that's the idea. But like he responds with, no, that's your job, right? I'm here to help you, but it's your job to keep us safe. Like I can't do this by myself, right? And that's kind of what you've done is built out this team of people to help you, or to help the company actually secure its assets.
Yeah, and certainly, like it's an entire team effort. Definitely could not have been like one-man army, because when we look at people in AppSec, like you need to have like variety of skill sets, from being an expert at like reading code, understanding the code, running dynamic, configuring dynamic scanning tools, running static scans, like so many multitudes of skill sets, and everything has to come together. And it took us like, honestly, it took us like around like 2 years or so to get this whole thing up and running.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, 2 years doesn't feel like all that crazy to me, right? I don't know. I know you said 2 years sounds like a long time, but a big organization making some sort of change, but with support from the top, I guess that makes a big difference, right?
Yeah, and I think I actually tripled my team size in the last 2 years. We went from like 3 people in AppSec to like now 8, and trying to hire 2 more. So definitely, like the leadership is like very conscious about making sure that we are consistently driving investments, because they know like pen test worked really well back in the day, in the waterfall days where you deployed once or twice. But now when you're deploying like crazy number of times, like probably almost every other minute or so, uh, we just need to hire more security engineers, automate as much as we can, and provide tighter feedback loops to product teams, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are going to fix this one. And
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that like when you're including all the automation, you're presenting the results in a very actionable fashion, because I can print out a 700-page static scan report and leave it on the desk. And that would be a
You
terrible
can.
Yeah.
It's gonna go in the trash.
Yep.
That'll be the next place it goes.
Yeah,
After
and I
they
think
curse you under their breath.
it's really, really hard to find like good people in AppSec, in terms of understanding a developer's world, and trying and working hand in hand with the QAs and the devs on day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this podcast and you think that you are the right fit, you should definitely reach out to Rohan.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about that, because I think that so Seth and I have done a lot of hiring over the years of various folks. And yeah, I think more often than not, we get folks that are like, I don't know, even if they understand code, it's like, it's just so attack focused, and it's hard to find someone that's been on both ends of the spectrum. And I forget who I was talking to about this. I was like, it's just a sheer numbers game. It's not because this was somebody outside of security, and I was like, you've got security, which is its own thing, and then you've got AppSec, which is a niche within security. And think about how many organizations there are just in the US. Just take the US. Okay, great. So those people want their web applications to be secure, right? Like, yeah. So there's clearly a huge disparity between people that can do this work and the amount of places that like are wanting to have people that can do this work. Just by a sheer numbers breakdown, it's just impossible to get. So then it's like, well, what do you do? I mean, I think I've definitely seen, for one strategy that's worked, is to have people that are not senior, but do have maybe like a comp sci background and a security interest. And then just kind of like, I mean, for us, we've had several people at GitHub that were essentially interns, and they were amazing. We've hired, we gave offers afterwards, and they are amazing. They are amazing. They do fantastic work. But then like being able to find super senior people who know how to do the job, that is a whole other thing. Like, I feel like that's a really difficult spot for most companies.
Yeah, and now that I think of my team, like I have two people who have blue teaming background. I have two people who come from the software development side, and I have like two people who are traditionally born and raised in the AppSec world. So yeah, I get like different viewpoints on different things, and now that you said that, it all makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's just like I've found it hard to find people that are. I've found it hard to find. That sounds funny. It's hard to find people that are just super senior in like decent numbers, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I feel like also like this is another thing. I don't know. Have we talked about this, Seth? I'm not sure if we have. How like also super senior people tend to end up being more evangelists eventually. Like that seems to be the progression. And then eventually they're just like, I don't do any of this work. I just talk about it. So it's like, you know, I mean, like I definitely, I've seen that more than I've seen people that are like super senior and then want to stay like ICs, right? Just doing IC work and just being super technical and just doing the day to day.
Yeah, the other factor I also see here, Ken, is that like uh, if you are in an AppSec role or a security in general, the consulting part of it is like more tempting. Maybe there's a financial aspect to it, and you get to do like variety of work. But once you settle down in a full-time role, like you are kind of logged with that particular organization, and uh, it'll create a bubble around you, and a lot of people might not want to be in that bubble. Uh, so that could be one reason, it's somewhat difficult to hire full-time people like consultants. Yeah, it's a little bit more easier to find consultants in this role.
That's pretty fair. I mean, like, I will say financially, I do think. Sorry, Seth. I don't mean to.
Go for
what
it.
it is?
No.
I drink way too much caffeine, and I'm drinking these bangs, and it's just making me super talkative. Anyway, so I was just gonna say though that like I have seen a financial shift where consultants now it's actually hard to pay them as much as some of the companies are like paying for blue team, not just salary wise, but all like I was just talking to somebody, I won't put their name out there, who was like, oh, should I take this job? It's a blue team role and it's $50,000 more salary. And it's like, they also pay 100% for medical and dental and all that stuff. I'm like, well, is there like, yeah,
why are we talking about this?
Yeah. Why are we talking about this? Sounds awesome. And I like blue team because you have some ownership over something over time, like versus just seeing somebody and going, there's pros and cons to both, but from a financial aspect, I've actually started to see a shift the opposite way. I don't know. Maybe that's just for my little world.
I mean, part of it is, right, you're in a pretty progressive field, right? And well, okay, so we're a progressive field, but like the companies that you're working with are all pretty progressive on that end, and they've recognized that to get the top talent, right, to pull people from the consulting world or wherever else, they've got to pay consulting rates or more, right? So Rohan, you're right. It's easier to be a consultant in this field and help people because from my perspective, I know those mid-sized businesses, they can't afford like paying an AppSec guy, twice what they pay a QA engineer or a security guy, you know what I mean? Or a security engineer, they can't. And so like it sucks for them, but at the same time, there's got to be a resource for them there. So
you're right. Our mutual friend was just talking about that, Seth.
Yeah.
About like how he's like they're like, oh, it's so hard to find talent, but then they're like short them by tens of thousands of dollars in contrast to like what other people are willing to pay, like consultancies.
Yeah. Because I mean, that's just it. As a consultant, if you've got, if you know how to use Burp, and you don't have to be a senior guy to get hired on at a consulting firm, and they'll throw you work all day long, and they can pay you, usually a good bit more than what you could make internally at an org. So yeah, but but then I see the salaries coming out of from GitHub or Uber or whatever else, and I'm like, oh, that's comparable, but that's kind of the top tier of those companies. Yes. It's not necessarily the industry as a whole, right?
Yep. So, and I think that exactly the differentiator, like the top 10% might be like very attractive But when you look at the mean and the median, it definitely tells you a different story there.
Are you calling me an AppSec elitist, Seth?
Yeah, you're still kind of working in AppSec Wonderland, even if it's not as chill.
I feel like you're being gentle and nice and trying to say is that I'm an AppSec elitist.
So guys, I just realized that I am wearing one of my ninja shirts. I don't know if you can see my ninja shirt.
Oh, nice.
Awesome.
Yep.
Is this the swag you hand out to your to the internal developers who have passed the certification?
Yeah. So we hand out shirts, we hand out like ninja hoodies and mugs and certificates signed by our CISO.
Very
crap!
cool.
I've just forgot. I haven't mailed out any of the shirts I said I was going to mail out. Anyways,
way to go, Ken.
So you've got, so that's pretty cool that you've got like branded swag internally to also like sort of give people that are certified sort of like a differentiation. So like going back to the original question, you've got training, security champions. You've got clearly, because you had mentioned having like a DevOpsy scan result, a sort of like in the pipeline sort of configuration. And so was there anything I missed on that list so far?
There was one thing, like the QA, like the security testing, like those tests that you're doing in there, like is that? It sounds like it's very bespoke, very custom to your apps. Is that the case? It's very, or is it some sort of generic process that you're doing?
Yeah. So what we tried to do was, the problem that we ran into was like we couldn't create a specific kind of test case because every product, every portfolio looks so different. And through the training, we wanted to create kind of a framework on like, let's look at like what are the top vulnerabilities that we are finding. So we call it the Paylocity top 4, and then we train our ninjas to find that kind of stuff within their own application. So we're not necessarily telling them what the process should be, but we're giving them the tools and having them create their own custom test cases.
So letting them figure it out. That's that's pretty. That's cool, right? Like that's I keep going back to the whole sputter thing and like all the test cases that Ken and I wrote at one point, how difficult that is. But if you know the application, it's not really all that difficult. If you're creating tests for, hey, I'm testing login to make sure that I can add users, it's really easy to test the negative of that, making sure that they kicked out and locked out as they're proper. Stuff like that is fairly easy to do in the application. But if you don't, then you have to mock up a whole like this. It's just like this whole thing, and so
especially when you look at the sheer number of apps and microservices, the most fun part, and like how we are leaning more towards a cloud. Like it creates such a complex ecosystem. Like coming up with like common guidance for testing, doesn't make sense in the very long run because it's going to be like so very different.
Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah, and that's it. Like it's bespoke, right? It's there's no getting away from that. It's got to be custom for the app if you're really going to find those vulnerabilities, especially the business logic ones that you're talking about, right? If it's there's no way for you to automate that, or I mean, an AI is never going to. Well, it's not going to get there in the foreseeable future, right? Maybe at some point.
Yeah, and I think that was something that we're trying to do internally more as an experiment is when we look at our APIs, we're testing for like business logic vulnerabilities and IDOS and stuff like that, like who can access what, trying to like vertical, horizontal privilege escalations. So we created this internal product called like Auth Matrix, and the name was actually inspired by a Burp plugin called Auth Matrix. And because we used to use that, we just the term that's just stuck to us. And we realized that close to 60 to 70% of a pen test is looking for business logic vulnerabilities and trying to escalate privileges and trying to move laterally within applications or jump different applications. Like how about we try to automate that piece? So if we succeed in doing that, then the day one of the pen test will be okay. In the first 2 or 3 hours, you're going to review your DAS results, your SAS results, and your results from your business logic testing. And then you can start focusing on the more advanced attacks and start thinking about like, can we focus on the functionality where we have had like most code churn?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we don't. I don't know. Knowing as a consultant coming into testing, right? Like I spend so much time on those, like the easy to find vulnerabilities that I know that had they run Burp Suite or that they, something else, they would have found it. Right? It's really hard to get excited about SQL injection anymore. I'm gonna be honest, or cross-site scripting, because once you've seen so much of it, it's just like, come on, guys, this is a solved problem, right? I realize it's new to you, but had you done just a small modicum of research or, put a little bit of effort into it, you would have realized, oh, I need to use this when I'm building out this application as opposed to writing, SQL statements by hand. So, yeah.
That was the AppSec elitist.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
SQLi doesn't get me going. XSS doesn't do it for me.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Whatever, Ken. We've talked about this before. So.
No, it definitely is more fun to like chain together several things and use business logic or just like, some logic flaw in general. That's far more fun. But like, yeah, XSS is whatever.
I think going back to your previous comment around like, if you might think like something might not be exploitable or it's not worth fixing, and if there's a gray area between a low risk and theoretical risk. And, once we start doing advanced pen testing, I think that is where we'll end up with most of the times, because now you're going to find like stuff like which would really not matter. But when you start chaining attacks, when you look at like different results, I think you might think, okay, like it might go from a low to a critical in no time.
Yeah, we started like recently at work, we started labeling those as defense in depth. So like, for instance, I'm trying to think of like a good example, but I don't know. Let's say some I don't know. There's something that's sort of like some function sitting in front of another function, and it's like if there's one thing that changes in that function, then like the whole thing falls down authorization wise or something. I don't know. Just trying to make up an example. This stuff happens all the time. That's something we started calling defense. So like it's like not a low risk necessarily. It's just like you should harden this and like, yeah, so that there's something doesn't happen down the line. I don't know, it's a little abstract, but yeah, defense in depth, that's what we started calling it.
Cool. That's good to know.
Yeah, no, so are you doing like how are you scoring? One thing like I'm trying to figure out is a really good way, and Seth had brought up a couple of episodes back, Listo, which I've started playing around with to do like risk scoring. But I'm always curious like what people do to basically figure out where to prioritize their efforts.
Yep.
Obviously, if you got 2,000 apps and you've got 8 people, like yeah, right.
So we actually built this risk calculator internally, and like this was inspired from the OWASP risk rating calculator. What we tried to do was we tried to customize it to make it more applicable to Paylocity's context. For example, when we are looking at the payroll applications, we would try to see like what the motive could be from an adversarial standpoint. Like, is someone just trying to have fun, or are they trying to redirect funds? Like what kind of information are you exposing? PII, PHI, public information, non-public financial information. So that plays into the entire risk scoring process. 2 things that we literally copied off from that was ease of discovery and ease of exploitation. Like we added some commentary around it, like, can a script query discover this easily? Is this something that you're going to manipulate your URL and find things out? Or are you going to manipulate the DOM elements and find things out? Or do you have to perform 4 or 5 different steps or actions to get to a certain point to exploit this vulnerability that would, again, lower the likelihood of it being exploited? So we have like 8 criterias, like 4 between likelihood and impact each. And then we start scoring from there.
So, but like in terms of prioritizing your assets though, like is that?
Yeah. So we actually have a process to rate our assets. We usually go with like C1, C2, and C3 ratings for all assets, like C1 being the most business critical ones, C2 medium, C2 is high, and C3 is low. C3 is medium, sorry. Nothing is low. So,
okay.
Yeah. And our aim is to like focus more on the C1 apps because they are business critical. We give some extra hugs and show some extra love for those apps.
And so those are like, is it like consumer facing? They handle payments.
Yeah. So in the calculation process, I'm trying to remember like what factors do we consider in there. So one is, is this external facing, internal facing? Is this application being actively managed or not? Is this legacy application or not? Does this handle PII, PHI, or any banking information, regulated information? Are there any compliance obligations for this particular application? We also look at the scope of the users, like how many users actively use this particular application. I mean, like it could be a really important application, but only like 10 people use it, then probably won't care a whole lot about that. So like all of these go into determining if this should be a C1, C2, or a C3.
I like the idea of using the metric you mentioned of like, is it actively maintained? Man, that's like I feel like that is a super important one, because especially when you do find something and then like it goes to the, like you try to triage it and then there's just nobody working on the app and they're like, we wrote the app and we walked away and the business put us somewhere else doing other stuff. So it sits out there, but like no one wants us to work on it. So
two important other considerations we funnel in is like integrations with the mobile ecosystem and integrations with third parties, because your app might not be insecure inherently, but when you integrate with someone else, shit could go sideways real quick.
Nice.
Yeah, that's always that's a good description of it, right? Like
because you're like you
never know what you're accepting, or
I mean, we have a hard policy with like not allowing third-party JavaScript for that exact reason. Like on .com, like because like I'm not going to rely on somebody else's security.
Yep.
I mean, even when I worked at Living Social, the CTO, what was his name? Aaron something. Aaron, I forget. I think it was Aaron Battalion. Man, he was the same way. He didn't want third-party JavaScript in his application for the same reason. Because anytime you have to rely on somebody else's app, it's like, you're probably talking more like API specific type stuff or whatever. But this is just any third-party code was suspect and considered basically tainted sources of data.
Yeah.
And CSP wasn't really a thing at that time. So it was like, no, not getting in. Those are cool metrics, though. That's really really interesting stuff to like sort of draw upon.
Yeah, it is. I mean, again, it feels like you guys are pretty innovative, right? Like you've definitely got this kind of figured out as far as like how it works for your organization. So it's really like for us, it's satisfying to talk to someone that's actually like running it in that way, right? Because we talk to a lot of people, they're like, oh, we're thinking about starting a security champions program, right? And we're like, okay, well, what does that look like? Like you've got like an actual process in place for, hey, guess what? We go train them on Burp Suite. We're using Pluralsight. We're using these different resources to plug in. So it's satisfying to see it actually be effective, and in reducing that risk, reducing those vulnerabilities. Because realistically, that's what we need. So
I think a large part of credit like actually goes back to the leadership here, and the culture that we have here is like more entrepreneurial. Like although we have like enterprise goals, it is expected that you innovate. It's expected that you fail. So I mean, that's really helpful from an AppSec standpoint, because everything is almost like an experiment when you start working with your static or dynamic scanning tools, or whichever tool you're going to use. And there is no like silver bullet to securing your applications, so you can't help but innovate.
Whatever, it's a WAF. I know it. They told me that like 5 years ago. A WAF was the only way. So that's what I've been recommending. Rohan, what are you doing? You're destroying my like pristine view of the world over here. Sorry. Yeah. But okay, so on another note, speaking of vulnerabilities, we didn't get to the news article that Ken wanted to bring up that he was so
Oh yeah, I mean, we can talk about it if you guys want. I thought I was an interesting. Let me paste the news. This was This was the original article. And then hold on, let me find the Forbes article. I put it here somewhere earlier. Yeah. No, so basic gist was somebody wasn't happy with the way that their PayPal vulnerabilities, let me back up. PayPal changed their program to use, okay, here's the Forbes article that was about the original article. Anyway, so PayPal had moved their platform to HackerOne, and this cyber news person or group had submitted some vulnerabilities through the new HackerOne program and felt like the new HackerOne program was to blame for a lack of transparency and for their vulnerabilities not being taken seriously. And at least that was one part of it. There were multiple angles to this. The title is hilarious because it says, "We found 6 critical PayPal vulnerabilities and PayPal punished us." All right. So let's just talk about what the punishment was. So their reputation took a hit on HackerOne. Having been through a bug bounty program and being a blue teamer and reading these vulnerabilities, they're not critical, period. I mean, they're not. One of them, for example, was, let's see, it said, I'm just doing this from memory, by the way. I'm not even looking at the links. The one that stood out was that they were able to change the full name of the profile. So one semi-anti sort of like fraud detection things is that like you can only change 1 or 2 characters of your profile name at a time. And they found that if they just basically kept doing that, they could eventually change all characters of the name. Not critical. So to explain that, and I'm sure, Rohan, you have a similar team. We have a team that's dedicated to spammy behavior. That definitely falls under, if you were to submit that to our bug bounty program, a spammy behavior that is handled by that team. And like, if there are going to be multiple metrics that they take into consideration besides just changing the full name, and that's how we're going to do some detection. I'm not going to disclose all the things we use on the back end to detect spammy behavior, but that certainly is not a critical vulnerability. You know what a critical vulnerability is? A critical vulnerability is like a remote code execution, command injection. You've got shell on our boxes. That's critical. Changing the full name of a freaking profile is not critical. Secondly, and sorry, I'm very opinionated about this because it burned me up because I deal with bug bounty stuff every week, multiple days a week. So the other one, the big thing, the one that Forbes picked up on was a 2-factor authentication bypass. Once again, incorrect. That was not 2-factor authentication. It is we detected you logging in from a different IP, answer an additional question. That is not 2-factor authentication. And if you knew more about security, you'd know that. And I don't mean to be a jerk about this, but I feel like I'm going to take big business's side on this one on PayPal reading this article. It got me fired up. I read it last night because somebody posted it. I don't know if he wants me to say if he posted it or not, but I'm just gonna say somebody. And I read it and I was like, ooh, this gets me hot. This gets me steamed. Anyways, that's my hot take. I'd like to hear y'all's.
Yeah, I'm looking at the article right now, right? I mean, yeah, there's 6, like, some of those seem like a couple of them are like XSS issues, right? And again, we know how I feel about XSS. The full name change, their whole thing was, well, you won't be able to recover your account because they've changed the name on it. And I'm like, if that's the only thing that you have that separates one account from another, I mean, PayPal isn't tied to anything that's like, business related or like financial related that you could key back to. It just seems like, no, yeah, you're right. Like that, it's definitely not critical, right? The 2FA one, I'm trying to understand exactly how their auth flow, whatever, how they're determining what that exactly is.
Well, part of the problem is you don't actually get the details of the bypass because they're like, well, we can't do that. So it's like,
since the vulnerability hasn't been patched, we can't go into detail on how it was done. Okay, but write an article about it. That's cool. Okay.
yeah.
Oh wow. Like Charles proxy. Wow, you know that they're like advanced if they're using Charles. Sorry, yeah, Charles proxy. So, Rohan, is like, have you been using bug bounties there? Just
No,
out of curiosity.
so I have participated in bug bounty myself, but we haven't ever done a bug bounty, and I don't know if you're ever going to do it or not. Like, this is like my personal thing. I am a big fan of bug bounties as a researcher, but if I were a company trying to sign up with bug bounties, I don't know how comfortable I would be to open up my apps to the entire security researcher community. And again, like, there's no, it's not about being like right or wrong with this one. It's just a point of view I have. I've seen stuff participating at the bug bounties, stuff when you report something as a duplicate finding, researchers getting pissed off, posting stuff in public forums.
Yeah, it
And
happens to us all the time. Well,
and
yeah.
there's no control, right? There's no control. You cannot restrict someone from posting things anonymously across the internet.
Well, and often, like for us, they want to be added to the report, right? But the report has information about the other researcher, and it's not fair to that other researcher to disclose their email address, their profile names, the stuff that they like that's not fair. So we don't do that. We don't say like internally we'll link to the duplicate, but we're not going to share. And this is part of, backing up. This is like why what you're saying, they echoed in this sort of this article, which is like, well, they're saying that these, like the XSS thing, yes, there was XSS, but they said somebody already found it. And they also said it's super suspect because the day they reported it was fixed. And I'm not going to say that doesn't feel suspect. Absolutely. I get that. But at the same time, I swear this has happened to me before where I'm like, hey, somebody already reported this. And yes, the day of it was fixed. It was a coincidence. Coincidence happen. And also sometimes if it's fixed, it's because you reported it and like somebody's already got this in the, like it was, how do I say this? Like the window of when the vulnerability was introduced and the window to when it's fixed is so short that when two people find it in the same window of time, it's like, well, it's going to be, if you're like within this 4 or 5 day time box, like it's going to seem weird and coincidental, but it's going to happen. And it's like, I get why the researchers, especially if you haven't worked on the other side of triaging bug bounties, I get why they're like sort of annoyed, but at the same time, or feel like they're getting cheated. But at the same time, and I don't know what the best fix is for that. I mean, that's kind of hard. There is a bit of a lack of transparency just because some of these things you have to,
what I personally encountered was like, I wouldn't name which platform, but one of the bug bounty, the crowdsourced pen testing platform, what they do is they have a private bug bounty for the top 50 or 100 researchers, right? And like these people are ridiculously smart people. They have everything automated. The bounty opens up, first hour, you'll get like crap ton of findings. That's it. That is the end of it. Like you're going to find the most of it in the first hour when your like top 100 researchers are going to attack your application. When you're opening it up to the broader crowd, there's not much to find. So most of it is going to be like duplicate findings. And that's where like the bigger crowd is going to get pissed off. Like, hey, I'm trying to find everything that's a duplicate finding. How can this be?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes along with like the events that get run too, right? Because they invite I mean, Ken, you know that, right? Like you invite those top guys to come in and look at the apps and they get paid out and, yay, right? Like, but I'm sure as somebody sitting on the periphery that's, trying with the public ones to get to that level, it's going to take quite a while because they don't have the same chance at that stuff. Right. And so I can understand being frustrated and being like, hey guys, right. Like, I could be up there, but
yep.
All that stuff. the way you.
Yeah, the other thing too is we haven't talked about is like we do reviews internally as a team too. Like I've got code I look at. I mean, I'm on assessment right now. I'm doing code reviews in the middle of bug bounty stuff, in the middle of internal process improvements, triaging things. Yeah, responding to pings on architecture design discussions. I got a lot of things going on, right? But doesn't mean we don't still do reviews. And so sometimes when we say it's duplicate, we don't mean that some other researcher found it. You mean that we found it? Like I can't link you to my report because my report's my report. You can't see it.
Internal. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're like, sometimes it is a bit of a trust thing, and I totally get that. And I do feel like here's the thing though. They NA'd one of these findings, and like I don't know all the details. Maybe they NA'd because the researcher got sort of like, sometimes you get people that are a little aggressive, we'll say. And sometimes you lock threads because of that. Sometimes you NA and lock threads. And I know one of the things said it locked threads, and I know I saw another thing where they said they got NA'd. For us, we try actually really not, because it does cost you reputation. We actually try very hard not to NA things. When we NA things, it's like very obvious spam, or it's very obvious like you buy, because you can set up specifically through HackerOne, you can set up filters that say like you've triggered on these keywords. And when sometimes and it'll tell you, we showed the researcher these several like triggers, filters, warnings, and that person has not only bypassed all those filters and warnings, but they've also completely ignored what's on our bounty site. And even then, sometimes it doesn't get NA'd. It's just sort of like, it's like, but yeah, it's very hard to get NA'd on our side. Even still, going a bit further, we've tried to implement a system where if it makes sense, we give the person time to self-close the vulnerability, because on HackerOne, if you can self-close, then like you don't take a reputation hit. So maybe it's like, oh, you know what? I get why you're submitting this, and here's some mitigating factors why it's not, going to get paid out or whatever. But like, so you can do things to try and like foster a good relationship with your researchers. And I don't feel like NAing things is like maybe that, but again, I don't know what the details of what happened, but I think you should be very careful with the not applicable rating on HackerOne.
Yeah. So the other thing that I've got heartburn with on this article is, why is it that Cyber News is testing PayPal apps, right, and running through bug bounties, right? Like I'm trying to figure out what this relationship is that they have with their analysts.
Yes,
because that feels like, it was like maybe there's a journalist there that knows somebody that does bug bounty stuff, and that they wanted to use that platform to actually push this out. But it does feel a little weird, right? That's where this is getting pushed up.
And they accuse them of having ulterior motives to get the bounties for themselves.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, because they're using HackerOne to do first line triage, it's on the HackerOne employees, or it's likely that the HackerOne employees themselves are going to steal the bug and then submit it to that program. Is that what we're insinuating?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah,
it seems to be. Yeah, but I mean, I think that's not the case. But whatever, right? Yeah. Anyway, you're right. That was a super interesting article. There's a lot of different aspects to it. We'll see if it goes any further, and we can follow up on it. Rohan, we have been going for over an hour though, so we want to make sure to be sensitive to your time and everything else that we got going on. Is there I know, like we were talking before, that you're not very active on social media. Is there any place if people wanted to meet you or talk about, QA security testing? Is there some place that they could meet you, or that you'll be in the future?
Yeah, I think I'm fairly active in a read-only fashion on LinkedIn.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's probably one of the best places to reach out to me. And again, you probably have my email address as well, right?
Well, yeah, I'm sure we do, but I'm just saying, like, if any of our listeners want to.
Oh, yeah. I think LinkedIn would probably be the best way to reach.
Okay.
Me. Yep.
We'll link your profile from the page when the episode goes up as well, so people can find you.
Cool.
But we appreciate you coming on and your insight to hear about the program over there, especially that you're doing like security unit testing or security QA testing. That makes me pretty happy. And yeah, but hopefully things keep going well. Keep us surprised with what's going on. And
Yep,
for coming on.
and thank you for having me. Definitely was a pleasure being here.
Yeah, Ken, anything else before we wrap it for today?
No, just appreciate the viewers listening, and for you, Rohan, for coming on and joining us.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.